What if a single act of kindness could rewrite your entire life? For Ilara Vance, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt and despair, kindness was a luxury she couldn't afford, but gave away freely anyway. Her recipient was a nameless, silent man who haunted the alley behind the diner where she worked. To her, he was just a soul in need. To her boss, he was a problem. She risked her job every night, smuggling him leftover food, a small defiance against a cruel world. But she had no idea who she was really feeding. She thought she was saving a life, but she never imagined he would return to save hers, flanked by men in black suits and arriving in a car worth more than her entire world. This is the story of how a plate of scraps changed everything. The city of Crestfall was a place of brutal contrasts. Gleaming skyscrapers' monuments to unimaginable wealth cast long, cold shadows over the cracked pavement and grimy brick of the neighborhoods where people like Ilara Vance lived. For Ilara, the city wasn't a land of opportunity. It was a grinder, and she felt its gears pressing down on her every single day. Her world had shrunk to the space between two locations, a cramped third-floor walk-up apartment that always smelled faintly of damp, and her sister's antiseptic wipes, and the greasy, perpetually buzzing interior of the Corner Perk diner. The diner was a relic, a holdout from a bygone era, with its cracked red vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since 2008. It was here for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, that Ilara traded her youth and energy for a paycheck that was always a day late and $1 short. Her life was a relentless cycle of taking orders, refilling coffee cups and mopping up spilled milkshakes, all while wearing a smile as thin as the cheap napkins she handed out. The smile was for the tips, the meager cash she'd count at the end of her shift every dollar, a tiny victory against the mountain of debt that loomed over her. The mountain had a name, Chloe. Her sister, younger by 6 years, was the sun in Ilara's dim universe, but that sun was fading. Chloe was battling cystic fibrosis, a relentless disease that was slowly, cruelly stealing the air from her lungs. Their parents were gone, lost in a car crash years ago, leaving Ilara as the sole guardian provider and cheerleader. Chloe's medical bills were the real monster, a ravenous beast that devoured every penny Ilara earned, and then some. The letters from collection agencies with their bold red warnings were a constant, terrifying wallpaper in her mind. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, did little to ease her burden. He was a man whose soul seemed to have shriveled from years of breathing in the diner's greasy air. He watched the inventory like a hawk counting sugar packets and weighing bags of coffee grounds. His cardinal rule, repeated daily, was, "Nothing leaves this diner that isn't paid for." Nothing. That included the unsold day-old muffins, the slightly too browned slices of apple pie, and the pot of beef stew that was destined for the dumpster at closing time. To Henderson, waste was a sin, but giving it away was a fireable offense. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday in November that Ilara first saw him. The wind howled through the alley behind the diner, a bitter, biting thing that seemed to search for exposed skin. She was hauling 2 heavy bags of trash to the dumpster, her thin jacket doing little to stop the chill. He was huddled against the brick wall, a figure made of shadows and rags. He had a long, tangled grey beard, and his face was a roadmap of hardship, with deep lines etched around eyes that seemed to hold a profound, ancient sadness. He didn't beg, he didn't even look at her. He just sat there, trying to make himself as small as possible, as if hoping to disappear into the wall itself. Ilara's heart, already heavy with her own troubles, felt a sharp, painful pang of empathy. She saw in him a reflection of her own fears of being alone, of being invisible, of being crushed by a world that didn't care. She finished her task and hurried back inside the warmth of the diner, a stark contrast to the alley's frigid misery. For the rest of her shift, his image was burned into her mind. As closing time approached, she saw Henderson scrape the leftover macaroni and cheese and 2 unsold cheeseburger patties into a trash bag. Her stomach clenched. It was perfectly good food. A war raged within her. Henderson was right behind the counter doing his end-of-day accounting. If he saw her... But then she pictured the man in the alley shivering, his face gaunt. She thought of Chloe, who sometimes struggled to eat, and the sheer injustice of throwing away food while people starved just feet away became too much to bear. With her heart pounding against her ribs, she waited for Henderson to go to his office to count the cash. The moment he was out of sight, she moved. Her hands trembled as she grabbed a styrofoam container, quickly scooping the macaroni and the burger patties into it. She added a day-old roll and an apple that was slightly bruised. She wrapped it all in a plastic bag, shoved it deep into her own tote bag, and slung it over her shoulder, trying to appear casual. Henderson walked out of his office, his eyes scanning the kitchen. "Ready to lock up, Vance?" "Yes, Mr. Henderson, just getting my things." Her voice was steady, a small miracle. He grunted, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long before he turned to lock the cash register. Ilara held her breath until she was out the front door. Instead of heading home, she circled around to the alley. He was still there. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening slightly, a flicker of fear in them. "Hi," she said softly, her breath pluming in the cold air. I thought you might be hungry." She held out the bag. He stared at it, then at her, as if he couldn't comprehend the gesture. He didn't move. "It's okay," she encouraged, taking a step closer and placing the bag on the ground near him. "It's just some leftovers from the diner. It's good. Macaroni and cheese." She gave him a small, hesitant smile and backed away. "Have a good night." She walked away quickly, her heart a chaotic drum solo in her chest. She didn't look back. She didn't know if he would eat it. She only knew she had broken the rules, risked her desperately needed job for a complete stranger. As she walked home through the cold, empty streets, a strange feeling settled over her. Amidst the fear and anxiety, there was a tiny warm spark of something else, the feeling that for the first time in a very long time, she had done something that truly mattered. That first act of rebellion became a silent covenant. Every night, Ilara performed the same high-stakes ballet of deception. She became an expert at diverting Henderson's attention, at knowing the precise moment he would be distracted by a phone call or engrossed in paperwork. She learned to pack the containers in seconds, her movements fluid, and practiced hiding them under her coat or in her bag. The risk was a constant sharp thrum beneath the surface of her exhaustion, but the reward was seeing the man in the alley. He was always there, as if waiting. He never spoke a word to her, not at first. He would simply watch her approach with those soulful, weary eyes. When she placed the food down, he would give a slow, deliberate nod. It was a simple gesture, but for Ilara, it was profound. It was a thank you, an acknowledgement, a shared secret in the cold, uncaring city. She started to learn his preferences. He seemed to favor simple, hearty fare, stews, meatloaf, potatoes. He'd eat the bread first, always. She started adding little things when she could: a packet of sugar for the coffee. She sometimes smuggled out, in a thermos, an extra napkin, a plastic fork, so he wouldn't have to use his hands. She gave him a name in her mind: Arthur. He looked like an Arthur, dignified, even in his destitution. One evening, about a month into their routine, a group of belligerent college students, stumbled out of a nearby bar and into the alley. They saw Arthur huddled in his corner and immediately targeted him. "Look at this old bum," one of them slurred, kicking an empty can that clattered near Arthur's feet. "Get a job." Ilara was just approaching with her nightly offering. A hot surge of protective anger shot through her. "Hey, leave him alone!" She yelled, her voice louder and fiercer than she expected. The students turned surprised. "What's it to you, sweetheart? Is he your deadbeat dad?" One of them sneered. "He's not bothering anyone. Just go," she said, planting her feet, clutching the bag of food like a shield. They laughed, but something in her defiant stance made them hesitate. After another moment of posturing, they shuffled off, their drunken insults trailing behind them. Ilara's knees felt weak with adrenaline. She walked over to Arthur, her hands shaking. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft now. He looked up at her, and for the first time his expression was different. The weary sadness was still there, but it was mingled with something else, astonishment, and a flicker of deep gratitude. He cleared his throat, and a rusty, unused voice emerged. "Thank you," he rasped. It was just 2 words, but they were filled with a weight that startled her. "You're welcome," she managed to say. "They're just jerks." She placed the container of beef pot roast beside him. This time, as she turned to leave, he spoke again. "What is your name?" She stopped and looked back. "Ilara. But my friends call me Ellie." He gave another one of his slow nods. "Ilara," he repeated, as if tasting the name. A light. After that, their interactions, though still brief, changed. He would occasionally ask a question in his gravelly voice. Cold night tonight? Or was it a busy shift? He listened to her answers with an unnerving intensity, his gaze fixed on her as if he were memorizing every word. He never spoke of himself, never mentioned a past or a family. When she once gently prodded, asking where he was from, he simply looked away towards the glittering skyline and said, "A different world." One particularly grueling night after Henderson had berated her for breaking a plate, Ilara was feeling lower than ever. She brought Arthur his food, a slice of shepherd's pie, and sank down onto an overturned milk crate a few feet away, too tired to even think about the walk home. "You seem troubled, Ilara," he said, his voice softer than usual. Tears pricked her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to just notice. "It's my sister," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "She's sick, the doctors, the bills, it's just a lot." She didn't go into detail, but she didn't have to. He listened in complete silence. When she was finished, he reached into the pocket of his tattered coat and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. He handled it with a reverence that suggested it was his only true possession. He opened it carefully, and from between 2 pages he produced a perfectly pressed and preserved Edelweiss flower. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. The flower was delicate and white, almost otherworldly, against his grimy, calloused hand. It grows in high, difficult places. It's a symbol of courage. Ilara stared at it, speechless. It was the most beautiful thing she had seen in years. She took it gently, her fingers brushing his. His skin was cold, but there was a strange energy to his touch. I can't take this," she stammered. "It's yours." "It has served its purpose for me," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Its purpose is now to remind you of your own strength." She closed her hand around the small, precious gift. A wave of emotion washed over her gratitude, so intense it felt like grief. In that moment, this homeless man who had nothing had given her more than any customer who had ever left a $5 tip on the table. He had given her a piece of beauty. He had given her hope. She didn't know then, that back at the diner, Mr. Henderson had noticed the dwindling leftovers. He had reviewed the security footage, his beady eyes narrowing as he watched Ilara's nightly trips to the dumpster, noticing the suspicious bulk in her tote bag. He was a patient man when it came to protecting his profits. He wasn't going to confront her yet. He was going to wait until he could catch her red-handed and make an example of her. The trap was being set, and Ilara, with a pressed flower in her pocket and a flicker of renewed hope in her heart, was walking right into it. The first snowflake of winter fell on a Wednesday, a lonely wet fleck that melted on the grimy diner window. It was a harbinger. The cold was deepening, seeping into the city's bones, and with it came a chilling phone call that shattered Ilara's fragile peace. It was Dr. Matthews, Chloe's pulmonologist. His voice was somber, clinical. "Ilara, we've been monitoring Chloe's lung function. It's declined more rapidly than we'd hoped. The standard treatments aren't holding her." Ilara's blood ran cold. She stood in the narrow hallway of her apartment, twisting the phone cord around her fingers. "What does that mean?" "There's a new trial," he explained. "An experimental gene therapy treatment at the Sterling Medical Center. It's shown remarkable results in cases like hers. It could be a game changer. It could give her a real future." A desperate, wild hope surged in Ilara's chest, so fierce it almost knocked her over. A future, a real future for Chloe. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, we'll do it. What do I need to do?" There was a pause. "Ilara, this is the difficult part. Because it's experimental, your insurance won't cover any of it. The initial cost for admission and the first round of treatment is $50,000. $50,000. The number was so vast, so impossibly large, it felt like a physical blow. Ilara sank against the wall, the phone slipping in her sweaty palm. It might as well have been 50 million. She thought of the crumpled bills in her tip jar, the pathetic balance in her checking account. It was a joke, a cruel, sick joke. I don't have that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know this is difficult," Dr. Matthews said, his professional sympathy a cold comfort. "There are foundations, charities you can apply to, but it takes time. She needs to start the treatment within the next 2 months to have the best chance." 2 months? It was a death sentence, and a deadline all in one. That night, Ilara went to work in a daze of panic. Every customer's face, every order she took was filtered through the terrifying lens of that number. $50,000. The clatter of plates, the sizzle of the grill, Henderson's constant barking, it was all just white noise against the screaming in her own head. She was clumsy, unfocused. She dropped a tray of drinks, earning a vicious glare from Henderson. "Clean it up, Vance, and that's coming out of your tips." She barely registered his words. All she could think about was Chloe's labored breathing, the way she sometimes struggled for a full sentence. The image of her sister fading away was a vice tightening around her heart. She had to do something. Anything. As closing time neared, her desperation curdled into a reckless plan. Tonight she wouldn't just take the scraps. Arthur needed a real meal. And Henderson owed her. He owed her for the years of underpayment, for the lack of benefits, for the constant humiliation. It wasn't stealing, she told herself. It was a fraction of what she was owed. The kitchen had produced a glorious, unsold apple crumble pie. Its cinnamon scent filled the air, a small comfort in the bleak diner. Ilara's eyes fixed on it. A whole pie. It felt like a statement. She waited for her moment. Henderson was in the back, yelling at a produce supplier on the phone. With a surge of adrenaline, she grabbed a box, slid the entire pie into it, and then, emboldened, added 2 whole roast chickens that hadn't sold. It was far more than she had ever taken before. It was foolish. It was dangerous, and she didn't care. She shoved the boxes into her oversized tote bag and pushed open the back door, her heart hammering. The alley was dark, the air frigid. Arthur was there, a frail silhouette against the brick. She rushed toward him, a frantic, desperate energy propelling her forward. "Arthur," she said, her voice breathless. "I brought you something special tonight." She pulled out the boxes, her hands trembling as she opened them to show him the feast. A rare, small smile touched his lips, and then the alley was flooded with harsh, artificial light. "Well, well, well. Look what we have here." Ilara spun around. Mr. Henderson stood in the doorway, his arms crossed his face, a mask of smug triumph. Standing beside him was a grim-faced security guard from the adjacent office building, a man Henderson must have tipped off. "I knew it," Henderson sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew you were stealing from me, you worthless little thief, giving my profits to this filth." Ilara froze, the pie box still in her hands. The color drained from her face. "Mr. Henderson, Please, it was just leftovers. It was going to be thrown out. Don't you lie to me," he roared, stepping into the alley. "That's a whole pie. That's $40 worth of product. And the chickens, you've been doing this for months, haven't you? Bleeding me dry." He advanced on her, his face contorted with rage. "You're fired, Vance. You hear me? Fired, and I'm calling the cops. I'm having you arrested for theft." No. The word was a strangled cry, an arrest, a criminal record. She'd never get another job. Chloe. Oh God, Chloe. "Please, Mr. Henderson, I'll pay for it. Please don't call the police." Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded, her carefully constructed world collapsing into rubble around her. The security guard looked uncomfortable, but stood his ground. Henderson just laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Too late for that. You should have thought of that before you decided to run a charity with my money." He turned to Arthur, who had risen slowly to his feet. He was watching the scene with an unnerving calm, his sad eyes now holding a different, unreadable emotion. "And you," Henderson spat, "get out of here. I'm calling sanitation to have this whole alley cleared. Go find someone else to leech off of." Henderson pulled out his phone and triumphantly dialed 911. Ilara sank to her knees on the cold, greasy pavement, the pie forgotten at her side. She was fired. She was about to be arrested. She had no money, no job, no hope. She had hit rock bottom, and the only sound she could hear was the hateful voice of her boss reporting her to the police, and the distant, mocking wail of an approaching siren. The police arrived, their flashing red and blue lights painting the grimy alley in strokes of frantic color. Ilara was a mess of tears and incoherent pleas. Henderson, puffed up with self-righteous fury, gave his statement, with relish, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara and the boxes of food on the ground. The two officers, a weary-looking veteran named Miller, and his younger, more rigid partner, listened patiently. They looked at Ilara, a sobbing girl on her knees. They looked at the food. They looked at the homeless man, Arthur, who stood silently, a statue of quiet dignity amidst the chaos. He hadn't said a word, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. "Sir, we understand you're upset," Officer Miller said to Henderson, his tone flat. "But for a slice of pie and some leftover chicken, an arrest seems a bit—" "It's the principal," Henderson shrieked. "She's a thief." Just as Miller was about to cuff a devastated Ilara, Arthur took a single step forward. "That won't be necessary, officers," he said. His voice was completely different. The raspy, hesitant tone was gone. In its place was a voice of quiet, unshakable authority. It was deep, resonant, and carried a natural command that made everyone, including the police, turn and stare. Henderson scoffed. "Oh, and who are you to say?" "Her partner in crime." Arthur ignored him, his gaze fixed on Officer Miller. "My name is Julian Croft. I would advise you to check that name in your system. And I would also suggest you call your precinct captain, David Chen. Tell him Julian Croft is in the alley behind the Corner Perk diner and requires his immediate attention." Officer Miller and his partner exchanged a skeptical look. "Julian Croft," the younger officer repeated with a smirk. "Right, and I'm Bruce Wayne." But Miller the veteran paused. There was something in the man's demeanor, the unwavering confidence, the precision of his speech, the sheer audacity of his request. It was a gamble, but a good cop learns to trust his instincts. "All right," Miller said, slowly pulling out his radio. "Let's just see." He turned away, his voice low as he spoke into the receiver. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elara stared at Arthur, utterly bewildered. Julian Croft who? Was Julian Croft? Henderson was tapping his foot impatiently, ready to see her hauled away. Less than a minute later, a panicked squawk erupted from Miller's radio. He straightened up as if he'd been shocked, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at Arthur, at Julian Croft with a newfound awe and terror. "Captain Chen is on his way, sir." Miller said, his voice now laced with a respect that bordered on fear. He says we are to extend every courtesy and follow your every instruction." Henderson's jaw dropped. What is going on? He's a bum!" Before anyone could answer, the wail of sirens returned this time, closer, louder, and more numerous. It wasn't just a patrol car. Within minutes, the narrow street was blocked by two sleek black sedans and a police cruiser moving at high speed. Captain David Chen, a man whose face Elara had seen on the news, jumped out of the lead car before it had even fully stopped. But it was the other cars that stole the breath from her lungs. Two men in impeccably tailored black suits and earpieces emerged from the first sedan. They moved with the silent, efficient grace of predators, their eyes scanning the alley hands held near their jackets. They immediately flanked Julian, creating a human wall between him and everyone else. Another man, older, with silver hair and a concerned expression, rushed from the second car carrying a thick cashmere overcoat. "Mr. Croft, sir, are you all right?" The silver-haired man asked, his voice fraught with worry, as he draped the coat over Julian's shoulders, covering the tattered rags. "I am fine, Robert," Julian said calmly. "A bit cold, but otherwise unharmed." Captain Chen rushed up, his face pale. "Mr. Croft, we had no idea. Your security detail lost you 3 months ago. We thought. I know what you thought, David. It was what I intended for everyone to think." Julian said, his voice cool and steady. He turned his attention from the stunned police captain to the utterly flabbergasted Mr. Henderson. "You," Julian said, and the single word was colder than the November wind. "You run this establishment." Henderson could only nod his mouth, opening and closing like a fish. "You wish to press charges against this young woman." Julian continued, gesturing to Elara, "for giving me food you intended to throw in a dumpster. Food that my company's agricultural division likely produced, that my logistics company probably shipped, and that was sold in a diner that sits on land my real estate firm owns." Every word was a hammer blow. Henderson staggered back as if he had been physically struck. "Land he owned, and you, Elara." Julian said, his voice softening as he turned to her. She was still on the ground, staring up at this impossible scene, tears forgotten her mind, reeling in a state of shock. He knelt down, not caring about the grime, on the knee of his worn trousers. His eyes were the same, the sad, kind eyes she knew, but they were now set in the face of a man who commanded power. She couldn't begin to comprehend. "I am sorry you had to endure this," he said gently. "Your kindness in a world of Hendersons. It was the one thing I found that was real. He stood up and addressed one of the men in suits. "Michael, take care of this. Purchase the diner. Give Mr. Henderson $1 for it. That should cover the cost of the pie. Then have him escorted from my property." He then looked at Captain Chen. "And David, please see that this young lady gets a ride home. Ensure her absolute safety." He turned back to Ilara one last time. The guards were already moving one, ushering a whimpering Henderson away the other, speaking quietly into his wrist. "I will come to see you tomorrow, Ilara," Julian said. "We have much to discuss." With that, he was swept away by his security team and his aide Robert, and guided into the back of a gleaming black Maybach that seemed to have materialized out of thin air. The car doors closed with a silent, expensive thud. The police cars and the sedans pulled away, their lights extinguished, leaving the alley in a sudden, shocking silence. Ilara was left standing between a stunned Officer Miller and a pile of discarded food, the scent of cinnamon and apples still hanging in the air. Her world hadn't just been turned upside down. It had been shattered and reassembled into a shape she no longer recognized. The homeless man she had tried to save was Julian Croft, a billionaire who had just bought a diner for $1 and promised to see her tomorrow. And she had absolutely no idea what that meant. Ilara didn't sleep. She sat on her lumpy sofa, the pressed Edelweiss flower on the coffee table beside her, a fragile, impossible truth in a world that no longer made sense. She replayed the events of the alley over and over, each time feeling a fresh wave of vertigo. The transformation of Arthur into Julian Croft was like something from a fairy tale, but it had felt terrifyingly real. The next morning, she called the hospital with a leaden heart to tell them she had lost her job, and there was no way she could afford the treatment for Chloe. The nurse was sympathetic, but firm. There was a waiting list for financial aid, and it was very, very long. The call ended, and Ilara buried her face in her hands, the brief, insane hope of the previous night dissolving into the familiar grey despair. Julian Croft had made a grand exit, but what if it was just that, a dramatic gesture? What if he wouldn't actually show up? Billionaires had better things to do than worry about a fired waitress. At precisely 10 Zurulos A.M., there was a firm, polite knock on her apartment door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She peered through the peephole and saw him. He was alone. The transformation was even more stunning in the light of day. The tangled beard was gone, replaced by a clean-shaven jaw that revealed a strong, handsome face, older, yes, but dignified. His hair was neatly trimmed and silver at the temples. He wore a simple but exquisitely tailored grey suit. This was not Arthur. This was unequivocally Julian Croft. With a trembling hand, she opened the door. "Good morning, Ilara," he said, his voice the same calm, resonant one from the alley. "May I come in?" She nodded numbly and stepped aside. He entered her small, clean but worn apartment, his presence so large and powerful it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He didn't look down on his surroundings. Instead, he took them in with a respectful, observant gaze, his eyes lingering on a framed photo of her, and a smiling, healthier Chloe on the mantelpiece. "Please sit," she stammered, gesturing to the sofa. "Thank you," he said, sitting down. He didn't lean back or relax. He sat with a poised stillness, a man completely in control. "I imagine you have a great many questions. I don't even know where to start," she confessed. "Are you who you said you are?" "I am," he confirmed. "Julian Croft, CEO of Croft Enterprises. Or I was. 3 months ago I walked away from it all." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ilara, for years I lived in a world of glass towers and boardrooms, a world of contracts, stock prices, and people who smiled to my face while sharpening knives behind my back. A major rival, a man named Victor Sterling, was trying to ruin me through illegal means, corporate espionage, blackmail. It became a war. I grew weary of the fight, but more than that, I grew weary of the person I had to be to win it. I no longer knew who I could trust. My own family, my closest advisors. Everyone seemed to want a piece of the empire, not the man. So, he continued, I arranged for a disappearance, a boating accident. The world believes Julian Croft is dead. It gave me the freedom to see the world as it really is, without the filter of wealth. I wanted to find one person, just one who was genuinely good, who would show kindness without any expectation of reward. I became Arthur, and for 3 miserable, cold, and enlightening months, I found nothing but contempt and indifference. Until I met you. He looked directly at her, and his gaze was intense. Every night you risked your job for a stranger. You never asked for anything in return. You defended me. You shared your own troubles with me. You showed me a decency I had started to believe no longer existed. You were the answer to the question I was asking. Elara was speechless, her mind trying to process the scale of his story. Faked death, corporate rivals, a billionaire, living on the streets by choice. Last night, he went on, his tone hardening slightly. When Henderson threatened you, my experiment was over. I could not stand by and allow your life to be ruined because of your compassion for me. My aide, Robert, the man you saw last night, has been my only point of contact. He and my security team were always nearby, under my orders, not to intervene, unless my life was in imminent danger. He paused, then his expression softened again. I overheard you on the phone this morning, Elara. I was outside. I heard you speak to the hospital about your sister. Elara's heart clenched. She felt exposed, her deepest fears laid bare. Chloe, he said softly, looking at the photo again. You told me about her in the alley. You told me she was sick. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, modern tablet. He tapped the screen a few times and then turned it to face her. On the screen was a confirmation receipt from Sterling Medical Center. It read, Payment in full. Patient, Chloe Vance. Amount, $50,000. Donor, the Croft Foundation. Elara stared at the screen, the words blurring through the sudden rush of tears to her eyes. $50,000. The impossible number. Paid. Just like that. I took the liberty, Julian said quietly. Chloe's first appointment is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The best doctors will be waiting for her. All of her treatment for as long as it takes is covered. Consider it a first installment on a debt I can never truly repay. A sob escaped Elara's lips, a sound of such overwhelming relief and disbelief that it was almost painful. It was real. This was happening. Chloe was going to get her chance. She looked up at Julian, tears streaming down her face, unable to form words. But this is not charity, Elara. He continued, his voice firm but kind. This is an investment. I am starting a new venture, a foundation dedicated to finding and supporting people like you. People who do the right thing when no one is watching. And I want you to work for me. Not as a waitress. You mentioned once that you had to drop out of design school. I've seen the sketches in the notepad you carry. You are talented. He stood up and walked over to her small desk, where her worn sketchbook lay open. I need someone with your eye, with your heart, to help me build this foundation's identity. I'm offering you the position of creative director for the Croft Foundation. You will have a full staff, a state-of-the-art studio, and a salary that will ensure you and your sister never have to worry about money again. All I ask in return is that you continue to be the person you were in that alley." Ilara looked from the tablet to her sketchbook, to the face of the man who was offering her not just a lifeline, but a whole new world. It was too much. It was everything. "Why?" she finally managed to whisper. "Why are you doing all this?" Julian Croft gave her a small, sad smile. "Because you, Ilara Vance, reminded me what it means to be human. And that is a priceless gift." A week later, Ilara stood in front of the Corner Perk diner. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been fired in the alley behind it. Today she was not wearing her stained waitress uniform. She was dressed in a simple, elegant navy blue dress, an outfit Robert Julian's aide had helped her pick out. Beside her stood Julian Croft, looking every bit the titan of industry in a dark charcoal suit. A black car, the same Maybach from that chaotic night, was parked at the curb, its engine purring softly. The diner looked exactly the same, yet entirely different. The open sign was dark. A closed sign hung crookedly in the window. "Are you ready?" Julian asked gently. Ilara took a deep breath. "I think so. It's just strange, being back here." "A reckoning is not about revenge, Ilara," he said, his voice low. "It's about closing a chapter. It's about setting things right." They walked to the door, which Julian unlocked with a new shiny key. The moment they stepped inside, the familiar smell of stale coffee and old grease hit her. The diner was empty and silent. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. In one of the booths sat Mr. Henderson. He looked smaller without his usual bluster, shrunken and pathetic. His cheap suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were wide and fearful. He scrambled to his feet as they approached. "Mr. Croft, sir," he stammered, fumbling with the brim of a crumpled hat in his hands. I apologize for the misunderstanding the other night. I had no idea." Julian held up a hand, and Henderson fell silent. "There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Henderson. You were quite clear. You humiliated a loyal employee for an act of compassion. You attempted to have her arrested over food you were going to discard. You treated a fellow human being as filth because he appeared to have nothing. The only thing you didn't know was that the filth owned the ground beneath your feet." Henderson paled, sweat beading on his forehead. "Please, sir. This diner is my whole life. My family. This diner is no longer your concern," Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "My offer of $1 still stands. It is more than you deserve. My legal team has the paperwork. You will sign it. You will take your $1, and you will leave." "But what will I do?" Henderson whispered, his voice cracking. "That is no longer my concern," Julian replied, echoing Henderson's own dismissive attitude. "Perhaps you will learn some humility. Perhaps not. Either way, your time here is over." One of Julian's lawyers, a sharp woman in a pantsuit, stepped forward and placed a stack of papers and a single crisp dollar bill on the table. Henderson stared at it, his face a mixture of defeat and despair. He looked at Ilara, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. Ilara felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a sad recognition of his pathetic state. She remembered his cruelty, his penny-pinching, his constant degradation of his staff. She thought of the fear he had instilled in her, the constant anxiety. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "Sign it." With a shaking hand, Henderson signed the papers, took the $1, and shuffled out of the diner without another word, a broken man. The door closed behind him, and the silence that filled the space felt clean, final. Ilara looked around the empty diner. It was a place of so much misery for her, and yet it was the stage where her entire life had changed. "What will you do with it?" she asked Julian. "I had considered demolishing it," he said, walking behind the counter and running a hand over the dusty surface. "But that feels wasteful. And this place, in its own strange way, is important now. It's where I found you." He turned to her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "The Croft Foundation's first official project will be here. We are going to gut this building and turn it into the Elara Vance Center for Urban Compassion. It will be a state-of-the-art soup kitchen by day, providing gourmet, dignified meals for the city's homeless. By night, it will be a shelter and a resource center, helping people find jobs and housing." Elara stared at him, her heart swelling. "My name. You're going to name it after me. Your name is synonymous with compassion, Elara. It is the perfect name," he said simply. "And your first project as creative director will be to design it. The logo, the interior, the entire feel of the place. I want this to be a place of hope, not a place of shame. I want it to feel like you." The weight of his words, the sheer magnitude of his vision, filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission. She looked around the grimy old diner again, but this time she didn't see the cracked vinyl and stained floors. She saw a bright, warm space filled with light. She saw comfortable chairs and beautiful art on the walls. She saw people being treated with the dignity they deserved. She saw the kindness she had shown to one man being multiplied 1,000-fold. "I know just what to do," she said, a real, genuine smile spreading across her face, bright and full of promise. The chapter of The Poor Waitress was closed. A new one, the story of the designer, the philanthropist, the creator of hope, was just beginning. 6 months later, Elara stood on the sidewalk opposite the newly christened Elara Vance Center for Urban Compassion. The transformation was breathtaking. The drab, forgettable facade of the Corner Perk diner was gone, replaced by a modern design of warm wood, gleaming glass, and inviting lights. The logo she had painstakingly designed a stylized E and V that formed the shape of 2 hands holding a warm bowl was proudly displayed above the entrance. The grand opening was today. News vans were parked down the street, and a respectable crowd had gathered. Mayor Thompson himself was scheduled to give a speech. It was all surreal. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. "It's beautiful, Ellie." She turned to see Chloe standing beside her. The change in her sister was even more profound than the buildings. The gene therapy was working miracles. Color had returned to her cheeks, the constant rattling cough was gone, and she no longer struggled for breath. She was enrolled in online university courses, her bright mind finally free to soar. The shadow of death that had haunted their lives for so long had vanished, replaced by the brilliant sunshine of a future. "You're the beautiful one," Elara said, her voice thick with emotion, as she squeezed her sister's hand. Julian Croft joined them, looking relaxed and content in a way Arthur never had. He had found his own peace, not in a boardroom, but here building something meaningful from the ground up. He had quietly reclaimed his identity, causing a seismic shock in the financial world, and had leveraged his immense resources to launch the foundation with unprecedented speed and impact. His rival Victor Sterling was now facing federal investigation, his empire crumbling under the weight of the evidence Julian had gathered during his time in the shadows. "The architects followed your designs to the letter," Julian said to Elara, his eyes crinkling with a proud smile. "You have a gift. You gave me the chance to use it." She replied her gratitude, a constant warm presence in her heart. Their relationship had evolved into a deep, respectful friendship. He was her mentor, her partner in this incredible venture. He challenged her, listened to her ideas, and valued her perspective above all others. For the first time in her life, Ilara felt not just seen, but truly valued for her mind and her heart. Later, inside the center, the event was in full swing. The interior was even more stunning than the outside. It was bright open and filled with art and comfortable seating. The kitchen, visible behind a long serving counter, was a chef's dream. But the most beautiful sight was the guests, the city's forgotten people, the men and women who lived in the alleys and under the bridges. They were being served restaurant-quality food on real plates by volunteer waiters treated not as charity cases, but as honored patrons. Ilara saw a man who looked startlingly like Arthur had his face etched with hardship. He was eating a bowl of rich beef stew, the same meal she had once given Julian, and his eyes were closed in a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure. In that moment, the entire journey came full circle. Julian found her standing near a window that looked out onto the alley where they had first met. The alley was clean now, well lit with a small garden planted along the brick wall. A single act of kindness, Julian mused, following her gaze. It's like a stone tossed into a still pond. The ripples just keep expanding. I was just giving a man some food because he was hungry, Ilara said softly. I never imagined this. The most profound actions are often the simplest, he replied. You weren't trying to change the world, Ilara. You were just trying to change someone's evening. And in doing so, you changed everything. For you, for Chloe, for all these people. And for me. He held out his hand. Tucked in his palm was a small, perfectly preserved Edelweiss flower, identical to the one he had given her. I believe this belongs to you, he said, a reminder of courage. She smiled, her heart full to bursting. She had faced down poverty, despair, and fear. She had found her purpose, saved her sister, and helped create a beacon of hope in the heart of the city. Her life was no longer defined by what she lacked, but by what she had chosen to give. And it all started here, in this place, with a simple plate of leftovers offered to a lonely stranger in the cold. The ripple was still expanding, and she knew with a certainty that warmed her to her soul, that it would never, ever stop. Ilara's story reminds us of a powerful, often forgotten truth. You never know the impact of a single act of kindness. A gesture that seems small to you could be a lifeline for someone else. Her decision to share what little she had wasn't an investment. It was an act of pure empathy. She didn't help a billionaire in disguise. She helped a human being in need. The incredible rewards that followed were simply the universe's way of balancing the scales. This story asks us to look at the world a little differently, to see the potential in every person, regardless of their circumstances. What ripples could you start today? Who in your life, or even on your street, could use a small gesture of compassion? If this story touched your heart, please help us share it. Click the like button, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. And in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced an act of kindness that changed your day or even your life? Let's fill the comments with positivity. Thank you for listening.